It was supposed to be a closed-door hearing, the kind of high-level proceeding where national security meets legal theater, where the real action happens in what's not said, and the headlines come from what's been redacted. But this one didn't go as planned, because Kash Patel walked into that federal courtroom armed with something the judge never expected. Receipts. The hearing was held under tight security in Washington, D.C., inside the Federal Intelligence Review Panel, a temporary commission established to investigate source manipulation and classified disclosures tied to government overreach. On paper, Patel was just another witness, but the reality was different. Everyone in the room knew if anyone could unravel the truth in 30 minutes or less, it was different. Everyone in the room knew. If anyone could unravel the truth in 30 minutes or less, it was him. Across from him sat Judge Lenora Beck, a progressive-leaning federal judge known for her fierce temperament and iron grip on courtroom narratives. She'd made it clear from the start. Mr. Patel, while this panel respects your prior clearance levels and background in counter-terrorism, you will answer questions fully that includes your sources. Kash, dressed in a plain gray suit, leaned in slowly. Understood, Your Honor. But just so we're clear, you're asking me to reveal national security sources under oath on the record in front of cameras. The judge didn't flinch. You're no longer in the field, Mr. Patel. You're a civilian now. This court demands transparency. A hush fell. Even some of the panelists shifted in their seats, but Kash didn't break eye contact. He reached down slowly, pulled a thin manila folder from his bag, held it up. Then allow me to be transparent. He opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper stamped across the top and read to classified, and right below that the signature of Judge Lenora Beck. The room froze because Kash hadn't just come with documents. He'd come with the judge's own paper trail. Judge Lenora Beck's jaw didn't drop, but her eyes betrayed her. She recognized the document instantly. It was an internal DOJ memo from 3 years earlier, once marked eyes only, buried in a classified annex during a national security leak investigation, and now declassified and held in front of her like a mirror. Kash didn't blink. You want to know my sources? Let's start with the memo you signed, authorizing the DOJ to suppress the investigation into illegal surveillance on American citizens because it might have embarrassed a few people in your party. A low gasps moved through the courtroom. Even the stenographer missed a beat. Judge Beck straightened her back, trying to reclaim her authority. This court will not tolerate political posturing, Mr. Patel. Kash laid the document gently on the table, the declassified stamp still facing the room. This isn't political, Your Honor. It's factual, and it bears your name. He looked up. You wanted my source. You're looking at her. Several of the panelists exchanged urgent whispers. The gallery, full of national security staffers, legal observers, and at least 3 network reporters, had gone from passive listening to silent disbelief. Kash wasn't just revealing a source. He was exposing a system. You presided over FISA warrant extensions that targeted American journalists. You authorized metadata collection from private citizens with no criminal referrals, and then you classify the paper trail until this week. He tapped the memo again. I got it declassified legally because I knew this moment was coming. Judge Beck's voice turned sharp. You're deflecting. This proceeding is about the use of undisclosed informants. Kash leaned forward. And that memo proves you knew about them and helped hide them. The panel chair leaned into his microphone. Mr. Patel, are you formally entering this document into the record? Kash nodded once, with pleasure, and the moment the clerk took the paper from his hand, the hearing officially became history. The courtroom changed the moment the clerk slid the declassified memo into the official record. What was supposed to be a surgical inquiry into source protection had now become something else entirely. A live autopsy of the federal surveillance state, with the scalpel held by Kash Patel. Judge Beck was no longer in control. She knew it. The panelists knew it. The cameras streaming this session knew it too. And Kash, he didn't flinch. He pressed forward deliberately, like a man who had rehearsed this moment, not for applause but for accountability. For the record, he said, pointing to the memo, this document is dated February 9, 2022. It authorized suppression of internal whistleblower reports regarding illegal surveillance programs run under the guise of foreign threat monitoring, and the signature authorizing that suppression, he pointed directly to the name, belongs to the presiding judge in this courtroom. A panelist, Senator Brea Maxwell, a centrist Democrat known for his obsession with process, finally spoke up. "Mr. Patel, are you implying Judge Beck knowingly concealed the use of illegal intelligence methods?" Kash didn't skip a beat. "I'm not implying anything. I'm proving it." He opened the folder again, this time pulling out 2 more pages. These are redacted versions of the whistleblower complaints that Memo shut down. They were filed by 2 analysts from the NSA who were told to delete logs of domestic targets. One of those targets was a sitting journalist. The other, he looked toward the bench, a congressional candidate running against a favorite incumbent. The gallery was holding its breath. This wasn't a leak, this was a detonation. And every word was now official testimony entered under oath. Judge Beck shifted her weight, clearly agitated. "Mr. Patel, you are dangerously close to contempt." Kash smiled, not smugly, but like someone who knew the game was finally being played on level ground. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I'm not the one who signed a memo to suppress federal evidence." And for the first time in the entire hearing, Judge Beck had no words. The moment Judge Beck didn't respond, the room began to turn, not in volume, but in gravity. Because the most powerful silence in any courtroom is the kind where the judge doesn't speak, and the witness doesn't blink. Kash Patel looked calm, focused, deadly. "You can warn me about contempt, Your Honor," he said slowly, "but the only thing I hold contempt for is the weaponization of secrecy to protect political allies." The memo sat on the table between them, glowing under the overhead lights like a courtroom relic. One of the younger panelists, representative of Murray Clean, a newly elected independent with a law background, spoke up for the first time. "Mr. Patel, are you saying the court was actively involved in the suppression of lawful intelligence whistle-blowing?" Kash nodded, flipping to the final page of the folder. "Not only involved, complicit," he slid the last page forward. "This is the communications log between the Office of Legal Counsel and Judge Beck's chambers requesting emergency judicial silence on surveillance disclosures that would have impacted midterm election narratives." Judge Beck's face was stone, but her knuckles, gripping the edge of her desk, had gone white. "These materials were not authorized for release," she said. Kash looked her square in the eye. "They are now." He turned to the panel. "I petitioned for declassification through the proper channels, and it was granted this morning. This court no longer holds a monopoly on these secrets." Cameras in the gallery were now locked in, not for drama, but for documentation. What had begun as an inquiry into Cassius' refusal to name sources had now turned into a trial of the court's own ethics, and the judge was no longer presiding. She was under it. "So if we're really here to talk about sources," Kash said, lifting the memo again, "then let's talk about this one. Because the person who tried to bury the truth behind a black bar is sitting at the bench pretending to enforce transparency." And with that, Kash Patel leaned back, hands folded, voice calm, and waited for the courtroom to realize it had just witnessed something irreversible. The weight of what Kash Patel had just dropped was still sinking in. The memo, the whistleblower logs, the communications timeline between Judge Beck's chambers and the Office of Legal Counsel. It wasn't just a paper trail. It was a roadmap to systemic suppression, and now, with every word recorded under oath, broadcast to the public and entered into congressional record, there was no walking it back. Judge Beck adjusted her microphone, but her voice was thinner now. "This court reserves the right to challenge the admissibility of those documents." Kash didn't even look at her this time. He addressed the panel directly. "And the American public reserves the right to challenge the integrity of any institution that tries to hide them again." The gallery had gone completely still. One of the national security aides at the back whispered to a colleague, "This isn't testimony. This is cross-examination, and the court is the defendant." Representative Clean, visibly rattled but composed, leaned toward his mic again. "Mr. Patel, you're under oath. Are you alleging that Judge Beck intentionally buried evidence that would have revealed misuse of federal surveillance powers?" Kash replied without blinking. Yes. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Then, and I'm also stating that her demands today, for me to reveal sources, were not legal in nature. They were strategic, designed to bait me into compromising others so she could avoid being exposed. Judge Beck's gavel snapped once. That's enough, but it wasn't, because Kash didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, and the effect was devastating. You didn't summon me here for truth. You summoned me here hoping I'd be afraid to deliver it. But here's the thing, Judge. I don't work for you. I work for the truth. He paused, then slowly pointed to the court recorder, and now so do they. In that single moment, the balance of power shifted from the bench to the witness stand, and for the first time in her long judicial career, Judge Lenora Beck wasn't writing the record. She was part of it. The room was no longer a courtroom. It had become a battleground for legitimacy, and Kash Patel had just landed the cleanest strike of the hearing without shouting, without spectacle, without theatrics. Just facts, on paper, with the judge's signature in the corner. Even the panelists handpicked. Confident, some quietly skeptical of Patel when the hearing began, had started to shift in their seats, not to flee, but to reconsider. Because everything they thought they knew about this hearing, about this judge, was now in question. Representative Clean rubbed his forehead. Mr. Patel, what you're suggesting has consequences that exceed this chamber. If these documents are accurate, Kash cut in, calm but piercing, they are accurate, and they're not suggestions. They're proof. But piercing, they are accurate, and they are not suggestions, they are proof. He turned back to Judge Beck, who was now visibly rattled, her carefully composed facade giving way to a quiet, seething rigidity. You asked me to name my sources, but you never expected the source to be you. A murmur rippled through the gallery again, low, nervous, reverent, no camera moved, no one coughed. Even the courtroom artist had stopped sketching, because something had just changed. Not just the direction of the hearing, but its place in history. Kash opened one final document from his folder. This is a declassified internal memo from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It confirms that in 2022 an unnamed judicial figure attempted to delay whistleblower protections from reaching congressional intelligence committees. He paused, then flipped the page. Attached to that memo was this. He held it up. An email from Judge Lenora Beck's government account requesting delay of whistleblower referral transmission until a more politically favorable window. Account requesting delay of whistleblower referral transmission until a more politically favorable window. No one said a word. Because no one had to. The evidence was staring them down. Bold, time-stamped, irrefutable. Kash laid the email beside the memo and leaned into the mic. You wanted the truth, Your Honor. Well, I brought it, and the moment that email touched the table, the hearing was no longer about Kash Patel's transparency. It was about the courts. The silence in the chamber had become a statement all its own. No objections, no clarifications, no further demands from the bench. Judge Lenora Beck sat frozen, staring at the email she thought had disappeared forever. Its subject line coldly printed on the document Kash had just laid before her. Delay request, referral hold, priority timing, and her name was right below it. Signed, dated. Kash leaned back in his chair, not smug, not triumphant, just still. This isn't about politics, he said. It's about power. Misused, misdirected, and now documented. The panelists' once unified front now looked fractured. Senator Maxwell's fingers tapped nervously on his folder. Representative Clean looked visibly ill. Even the clerk to Judge Beck glanced toward her as if to say, "What now?" Beck tried one last grasp for control. "These materials are out of context. You're misrepresenting internal deliberations." Kash didn't look away. "That's your defense. That context changes the fact that you signed a suppression memo, intervened in whistleblower pipelines, and demanded I reveal sources, while trying to cover up that you were one of them." He held up the email again. "Context doesn't erase intent, and your intent, by every metric we value in law and intelligence and oversight, was to obstruct." He pointed to the court recorder without raising his voice. "Put that on the record." From the back of the gallery, someone whispered, "She's finished," and it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like judgment. For the first time, Judge Beck didn't respond. No defense, no gavel, no lecture. because anything she said now would only confirm what the documents had already proved, that this hearing wasn't about protecting national security. It was about protecting her. And that protection had just shattered. It was rare to see a federal judge cornered, rarer still to see one caught in her own trap. But that's exactly what was unfolding before the eyes of the nation. And the man doing it, not a prosecutor, not a senator, not a journalist. It was Kash Patel, former chief of staff at the Department of Defense, former prosecutor, and now the witness who came to defend his integrity and ended up putting a judge's on trial. Judge Beck tried one last time to assert her position, though her voice trembled now beneath the weight of exposure. This court was following guidelines related to information security and national interest. Kash cut her off. Not rudely. Just, with clarity. No, Your Honor. You weren't protecting national security. You were protecting narratives, He gestured toward the panel. You want to know why I won't reveal my sources, because some of them are still inside this system, still trying to tell the truth, and the person demanding their exposure, he turned it back, is the very one they were warning me about. The panel was paralyzed. The audience wasn't even reacting audibly anymore, because the magnitude of the moment couldn't be met with noise. This was the kind of silence that comes when power loses its mask. Representative Clean broke the stillness. Judge Beck, do you have any formal rebuttal to the claims and documentation presented by Miss Patel? She stared at the documents again. Her own name, her own email, her own authorization stamp. No loopholes, no redactions, just truth. Not at this time, she said almost in a whisper. That was it. The moment her gavel lost its meaning, the moment her role became cloth, not command, the moment the room realized it wasn't Kash Patel being cross-examined. It was her, and Kash, still calm, looked to the panel one last time that day and said, the next time someone in power tells you for national security, ask them what they really mean. Because when they say security, they often mean secrecy, and when they say secrecy, they almost always mean self-preservation. And the room, every soul in it, knew exactly who he meant. The panel chair, Senator Maxwell, leaned forward. His voice, once firmed with procedure, now carried something else, humility. Mr. Des Patel, are you willing to submit these documents for forensic review and authentication? Kash answered without hesitation. Already done. They've been vetted by ODNI, verified by congressional staff, and cleared for public release as of 7:45 this morning. He tapped the folder. There's nothing in here I wouldn't read aloud to every American watching. Because unlike the people trying to bury this, I didn't forget who I work for. The panel room had shifted from confrontation to awe. One by one, the press silently rechecked their audio feeds. Even the stenographer, barely keeping pace, paused at one point in whisper to herself. This doesn't happen. Judge Beck, still sitting in her elevated chair, now looked somehow smaller than everyone else in the room. Her silence was no longer strategy, it was surrender, and Kash knew it. He leaned forward one last time. I don't enjoy moments like this. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not here to burn things down. I'm here to hold them up to the light. But if you can't stand what the light reveals, then maybe the structure was never sound to begin with. He stood slowly. This hearing asked me for my sources, so I gave them to you. And the fact that you weren't ready to see your own name on that list is not my problem. It's your indictment. The panel chair cleared his throat and said, almost reluctantly, we appreciate your testimony, Mr. Patel. This committee is adjourned pending further review. But that wasn't the end. Because his Kash Patel gathered his documents in turn to leave, the gallery stood, not out of applause, not out of partisanship, but out of recognition. They had just watched a man do what most never dared. Tell the truth on the record to the face of the institution trying to silence it. Kash Patel didn't pause for the cameras on his way out. He didn't shake hands. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. Because what had just happened wasn't about him. It wasn't about personal victory. It was about pulling the curtain back on a courtroom that had been built to look impartial, while hiding everything that wasn't. That night, major networks ran segments, but they couldn't spin it fast enough. The footage was already viral. One clip hit 20 million views in 3 hours. It wasn't flashy. It was the moment Kash lifted the declassified memo and said, "You want my source. You're looking at her." And the internet responded not with applause, but with clarity. Editorial boards scrambled. Judges' associations went into emergency session. Whistleblower protection organizations called for an independent investigation. Even long-time opponents of Kash quietly admitted he brought receipts and he didn't miss. 3 days later, Judge Beck issued a statement. "While I stand by my record of service, I understand questions have been raised. I welcome a thorough and independent review." It was the softest way to say, "I'm under fire and I can't stop what's coming." And she was right. Because the story didn't die. It lived in classrooms and podcasts and coffee shop conversations about the difference between authority and accountability. And Kash, when asked by a reporter outside the courthouse what he hoped people took from the hearing, he said, "That truth is loud when you stop asking it to whisper, and if it scares the people in charge, then maybe we've let the wrong people lead." This wasn't just a testimony, it was a blueprint for how to fight back. With facts, not rage, with records, not rants. Because when a courtroom built to bury truth is forced to broadcast it instead, that's not just a win. That's a turning point.